Okay, this is the start of chapter 2, the beginnings of perception. Um, the focus of this chapter is going to be in the really the first three steps here in this chart: step 1, step 2, and step 3. We're going to talk about first of all the and we're going to focus on vision again because we are visual creatures, right? We're not dogs or rats that sense our environments by smell. Um, we are visual creatures, so we're going to focus on vision. All right. And first, we're going to talk about light itself, the stuff that bounces off of things and goes into our eyes. All right. We're going to talk about the nature of light, and then we're going to talk about focusing of the light in the eye. Right. How the light is bounces into the eye, passes through the cornea, through the lens, and then gets focused in the retina, which is on the back of the eye. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the what happens to the light once it hits one of the rods or cones that are located in the retina inside the eye. The rods or cones are the little squiggly things you see there listed under step on top of step 3, and these are the ones that allow us to. These are the cells that take light energy, photons of light, and transduce it, turn it into neural signals. So these are the steps that we're going to talk about in this chapter. The first thing is light. Light is part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So this is the electromagnetic spectrum is energy that travels through space. And the primary way that we separate out the different types of energy that travel through space is by wavelength. Wavelength is the size of the waves that the energy travels in. There are short wavelengths where the waves are very fast, and there are long wavelengths where the waves are very long and slow. Short wavelengths include gamma rays. Those are very high wavelength, all the way down to radio waves, the waves that we use for broadcasting, for example, on the AM radio dial, are much longer wavelength on the electromagnetic spectrum. Inside that spectrum is a range where humans are able to detect the energy. That range in the electromagnetic spectrum is what we refer to as the visible spectrum. And the wavelength is about 400 to 700 nanometers, which is very small. A nanometer is a very small unit of length. But any electromagnetic energy that's between 400 and 700 nanometers is what we perceive as light, the different colors of light. Most of the light that we see, that we look at, is reflected. So it comes from a light bulb or a fire or some other light source, the sun, and it emanates from that light source, bounces off of something like a tree or a wall or a person's face, and then that light that bounces off of that object then travels across the space between them and your eye, and it goes into your eye and is perceived as light. This slide is a picture on the bottom strip. The bottom strip here that you see here is the entire electromagnetic spectrum, going from the very short wavelength gamma rays all the way to the very long wavelength AM radio and waves in AC circuits. In between, located in between, right here in this little tiny rainbow that you see here in the middle, is the visible light that we can see. And if you explode that out, you see all of the colors of the rainbow here. And these are all the different colors that we can perceive between 400 and 700 nanometers. The colors are arranged from, if we go from right to left, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. The acronym is Roy G. Biv. If you can remember Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, you can remember all the colors going from 700 nanometers all the way down to 400 nanometers. These are all the colors that we can perceive. If you're a bee, if you're a honeybee, you can see ultraviolet. And honeybees can see, so honeybees have receptors that can see even shorter wavelengths than 400 nanometers in the 350, 300 nanometer range. Those are ultraviolet rays, and they use those to detect patterns in flowers. That's why flowers are so big and bright and pretty, is because bees use them. They want to attract bees to pollinate them. On the other side of the visible spectrum is the infrared spectrum. Heat energy gives off infrared energy. So your body gives off infrared because you are a mammal and you give off heat, and you can detect infrared. You can detect that infrared heat with an infrared visual goggles. Or if you're a snake, if you're a pit viper, like a rattlesnake, you have special little pits on the sides of your head that have receptors in them that can detect infrared. And pit vipers and other predators of that nature use those infrared detectors to locate prey. They usually eat mammals, right? So they look for little mice and rats and bunnies, and are attracted to the heat signature that's given off by the body heat of their prey, and they use infrared to detect that. Then we have radar, FM, radio, TV, old school TV, not the digital TV, AM, and AC circuits. Once some of that light bounces off of something, it travels through space and it reaches your eye. The eye is the organ in our bodies that contains the receptors for vision. So there are specifically two types of cells in our eyes, the rod and the cone. The light first hits the eye. It hits the surface of the eye, which is covered by a clear tissue called the cornea. The light then passes through the hole in the eye called a pupil, and then hits the lens. And the cornea and the lens work together to focus the light onto the back of the eye, which is coated with a layer of neurons called the retina. Living inside the retina are rods and cones. Rods and cones, in turn, they have proteins inside of them called visual pigments, made up of a protein called rhodopsin. It's this visual pigment, it's a huge molecule, it's this visual pigment that changes shape whenever it gets hit by a photon of light, one packet of light sort of. It gets hit by a packet of light and it changes shape. That causes a chain of events, a cascade of events that ultimately leads to the production of a neural impulse. And all those neural impulses are gathered up and ultimately make their way out of the back of the eye through the optic nerve into the brain. So the cornea is the first part of the eye that gets that receives the light. And like I said, it's a fixed, clear layer of tissue that's right on top of the eye. It's a part of the eye that if you touch your eyeball, that's what you're touching. You're touching your cornea, like right in the middle. And also, if you have a contact lens, you lay your contact lens on top of your eyeball, and the contact lens actually covers the cornea, so to focus the light better. The cornea is also the part of the eye that gets surgically changed if you have laser corrective surgery. Like if you don't want to wear glasses anymore and you want to have surgery to make your vision better, what they do is they hold your eye open, and then they use a very fine laser to make cuts in the cornea so that it changes its shape, and that in effect changes the way it's focusing the light that's passing into your eye. So the light passes through the cornea, gets focused there. A lot of the focusing happens in the cornea. Then it passes through another little blob of tissue inside your eyeball called the lens. The lens is right behind the hole in your eye, which is the pupil, and the lens can change shape. There's muscles, ciliary muscles. They're called ciliary muscles, which is indicated right here. Ciliary muscles pull and relax to make the lens either thicker or to make the lens either thicker or thinner, right? So the muscles pull the lens to make it thin, and then let loosen up to let the lens get fat. Works just like that. Okay, if this is a side view of the lens, the muscles pull and relax, and that's how they focus the light. The light's going to be traveling in this direction, and the lens simply is adjusted to focus the light correctly, the light rays correctly onto the back of the eye. So here's a picture of all of that, right? We're looking at a tree here, right? So here's the tree. Let's see. Let me do a pen. So right, so here's the tree, right? There's the tree. So the light travels, right, and it first hits the cornea, which is this part right here. Right, hits the cornea right there. Gets focused onto the, passes through the pupil, right, and the little muscles around that form the pupil have the color of your eye. That's where the color of your eye is, right? So these little muscles here that form the pupil, which is this hole where the light passes through, they can be brown in most people, or blue, or green. The light then passes through the lens, which is this little plump piece of clear tissue here, and then the light ultimately gets focused on the retina in the back of the eye. Now notice that the image is upside down. It is everything that is focused onto our retina is focused, is a shot onto our retina upside down. So we're seeing the world upside down actually, but our brain writes it so that we can see correctly. If we take this tiny little part right here of the retina and blow it up, it looks kind of like this. This is a cartoon drawing, right? The light is traveling, and the light is trying to make its way to these rods and cones, these guys right here, rods and cones. Now notice it has to travel through all this junk. It has to travel through ganglion cells and bipolar cells. As it's making its way, it's got to travel through all this junk before it finally reaches the rods and cones, which is kind of weird, right? But it's these rods and cones here, these little arrays of specialized neurons that are responsible for detecting the presence of light. Okay, these are the little guys that do the work. When we're looking at something that's really far away, right, really far away, the light comes in pretty straight. Right, it comes in pretty straight because it's far away, so it has a long way to travel. So eventually it comes in pretty straight, gets focused by the cornea, gets focused by the lens, and then gets projected onto the retina. Right. Whenever something is far away, the light rays don't come in straight like they do here. Rather, they come in at an angle. Right? So if you're looking at like a building that's at a distance, the light from that building will come in straight. But if you happen to be reading something right in front of your face there, the light is actually coming in at an angle. If it's not focused correctly by the lens, the focus point would actually be somewhere behind your eye, right? So by the time it hits your retina, it's not quite focused well yet. It's still kind of blurry. So what your retina does, what your lens does in order to focus close things, it does this process of accommodation. Whoops. Let me go back. Sorry about that. Oh, for heaven's sake. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it does this process of accommodation where the lens actually gets thicker, right? So notice that This lens here is kind of thin, and then since this eye is going to accommodate looking at this closer view, it's going to get a little bit thicker. It's going to, so the muscles that flex the lens are going to relax and allow that lens to poof up a little bit, which refocuses the light into a better place where you can see it. So instead of being focused back here somewhere, the light is now focused right here where it's supposed to be. Okay, and that's all because the lens changed its shape. It went from like this to like that, so that it could so that you could see.